Now, before I go any further with the surface of this water, I want to decide where the horizon is going to be. So this is not like an ordinary landscape where I have a horizon between the sky and the ground, but this is going to be a horizon that is somewhere in between the top of the water or the bottom of the air and the seafloor. So somewhere in between here and here. So I might consider where I want people to be looking at this from. If this is going to be hanging up high, then I might want the horizon closer to eye level for the viewer. So I might make it lower so that it actually appears that you are looking up at that surface. It won't look as natural if I'm viewing it from right here and the horizon is down here, because I'm turning my head down to look at something that would be up if it's above the horizon. So I want to make it, in conjunction with the way the viewer is going to be looking at the picture. I'm thinking that I'm going to make it right in between this seafloor and the surface so that I can make real dynamic perspective. Now in this next section that you're about to see, I paint the surface of this water, not just once, but twice, because the first technique that I used didn't come out looking as good as I wanted it to look. So I had to troubleshoot it. But instead of just cutting it from the video, I left it in there so that you can see my process for troubleshooting. Just about every job I do has a moment like that where I feel like I'm using good technique, but for some mysterious reason, it's just not looking as good as I want it to. But I use my knowledge of what it needs to look like in the end in order to figure out what I can do to improve the picture and develop better technique. Good technique is built on knowledge of what I'm painting. And if you're just copying the technique of another artist without knowing exactly why the technique works, then that's not as powerful as if you know what it needs to look like in the end, and so you develop a technique in order to accomplish that goal. I want you to have that power, so I want to make sure that I share with you all of the knowledge that I'm considering when I'm troubleshooting this picture. Okay, so that's the surface of my water. And it looks good, but it could look better. I did exactly what I said don't do. I'm seeing that I closed in all of my negative space, and now it just looks even across the whole thing. I went too far with these dark blue strokes. And also, I didn't make my lines coming to a point very well. I was connecting all these little lines to try to create perspective of larger lines coming to a point, but they're not coming to a point. They just look parallel. All these lines as they crisscross just look parallel. Now the reason that happened is because I didn't make the strokes down here flatter and straighter. They need to be flatter and more stretched out the closer I get to the horizon in order to create that perspective. Now to do this technique, I'm using only this brush, and I'm going to use these two colors. So this is the one that I did all these little strokes with, but I made it a little darker just by adding the dark blue. And I made this one brighter green, a brighter blue-green. It's a turquoise. And the way I did that was just by taking white paint and putting green pigment in it. And you can get green pigment from all kinds of different places. You could ask the paint store for some of their green tint that they use to tint their paint with, or you could just buy it in tubes. Different companies sell it. It's a deep turquoise, kind of a green tint that I put in there. But you could also just pick a color right off the chart or right off the shelf at the paint store. What's important is that it's a brighter blue-green than what was on here before. Now the reason I went brighter here and darker here is because they're going to be mixing with each other now, because it's not a wet on dry technique, it's wet on wet. They're going to be mixing with each other a lot more, and in order to maintain more contrast, I want to start with them further apart so that when they mix, I'll still have the separation between my blue and green like I want it to be. So now I'm going to put them down here now that you've seen them. And to start with, let me show you what I mean with this perspective. So let's say that there's a bright spot right here. And if they're crisscrossing waves, a lot of times the resulting pattern is somewhat of a diamond shape. So Let's make this kind of a diamond shape right here. I don't even care about all the brush strokes under it. Let's just say that this is the bright spot of some wave. Now, I'm going to go smaller and flatter as I get down. Like this. Smaller, flatter, smaller, flatter, smaller, flatter. See how it just becomes a stroke down here? Right here, I'm just going to go like that. This is going to create a lot better perspective for me following patterns like that. Now I'll do another one. This will be good reference for me to not forget what I'm doing. I'll just paint over these. But it'll remind me to keep an eye on the shapes, how my lines are meeting up. Lines are powerful things. You know, sometimes we think of lines as just something you draw with a pen or a pencil, but imaginary lines are created because your mind wants to connect things. It wants to see relationships between things. So you imagine lines of perspective all through a picture depending on how things are placed. So I'm creating lines in a sense by just making lots of little diamonds. This is not going to be what my waves look like, but I just want you to see how this creates perspective. And see, look, I'll make another one here. This is going to get flatter and smaller. Flatter, smaller each time. See, now if I follow a pattern, no matter which direction I'm going, whether I'm going straight down, whether I'm going off at an angle like this, it doesn't matter if I have these dark lines that travel all the way through to a point, that would just be a guide. What matters is that the overall pattern, like I said so many times, just because it's important, is that it gets smaller and flatter as it gets down to the horizon. I'll lay down my bright color first. And I won't do so much that it's going to dry faster than I can get to it. So I'll put some on, and then I'll come to my dark color, and then I'll start making those same strokes that I did before. But this time, it's wet on wet. And I'm going to blend more, like this. So after I put it down, I'm trying to target the top edge of these strokes to feather them. I can just get rid of the extra paint like that because I'm going to paint over all of that. Now watch, I can do things to blend this more. Like a fast brush stroke right over the top of it. And this is probably more realistic because water is not at one angle or another. It's all different, all kinds of different angles. So having these soft gradients is going to look a lot more like natural water. I'm already headed toward making the same mistake again. Making these level, flat strokes. I want to make sure I stretch things out up here. Yeah, and I just sometimes just have a hard time with that. All right, now I'll go back to the green. I'll put this down right here. Now for the most part, not everywhere, but for the most part, I can cut this in and have that sharp edge where this bright green's coming up and meeting the bottom edge of these blue strokes. In most of my blending, I want to be the blue blending up into the green rather than the bright green blending up into the blue. It would go both ways, you know, but on the top of bigger waves, they tend to spike more on the tops, and that's why you get that effect. you know, because the lower areas are more rounded and the points are at the high spots. See, I kind of do strokes in different places, then come back. Come back after it's been distributed in different places out of my brush. And you can see, like I said, how it's mixing so that I'm not getting the completely pure bright green that I made. It's got some of that blue mixed in it. Some of the dark. Now I'm going to water down this dark color a little bit. How much you water down these colors really does make a difference with the technique. Like if I want this dark blue to blend in real soft, then I might make that dark blue a little more watered down than this light color that I'm doing, because that thins it out and makes it less concentrated so that I don't have the real bold dark stripe that's hard to blend in. So I'll show you what I mean. I'll just take this. See, I'll just put some water in there. Stir that around. Then rinse all that dark blue out of my brush. Whenever I rinse my brush, I just wipe it on the rag like that to get the water out, the excess water. And I'll come over here. I'm starting to get lower in the picture now, so I want to have more squished, flatter shapes than what are up here. This in here. Now when I get this blue, it's going to be a little easier for me to blend it in. It's just because watering it down a little just makes it less paint. Nice thing about a technique like this is I can just go back and forth and back and forth. I mean, I guess you could do that with the other one too. I end up doing that all the time. You know, I'll go too far on one color, so then I come back and fix it with the other. Then I go too far with that color. If I don't like how a spot looks, just do it again. Now when I get this low in the picture, I want a lot less of this bright green. Start using a lot more of this dark color. And also, you know, I don't have to put the light green on first. I can put the dark on first and then blend the light into it. Whatever. I mean, you can do it any way you want to, as long as you just have that same system to it. It's going to look like the surface in perspective, you know. I do need to step back once in a while to look at it, see if I'm doing a good job. Up at the top of the picture, I don't really want real dark reflection patterns. I want a lot of the bright green. And I want the dark to be more subtle. And I want to make sure that I'm staying with a rounded gradient too. I want to remember that. I want to remember that as I look out, I'm going to, if I look at a flat wall and I point at the exact same angle from where I'm looking and go like this, it's going to end up drawing a curved line on that wall, if it was drawing a line on the wall. Same with the surface of my picture. I want this to have a curve to it because that's going to be like you're in one place, and as you turn your head, then it's because it's at the same distance all the way around. It would draw a circle over your head where the gradient changes colors. So for that reason, I want to have less of this bright color as I get near the edges. I want to round this darker color up. So let's put more of it in here. Oh, I don't like the way that spot looks. Let's change that. It almost looks better when I think about it less and just go faster. Let's see if that's true. You know what I think I'll do when I get down closer to the horizon here is flip-flop and do the dark one first. Then I'll just put some of this bright one in there. And then if I'm doing the bright one, I'm blending the bottom edge of it. You can see that I do that a lot, that emptying out the brush somewhere else on the painting. I don't want to redo this again, so I'm trying to be real careful with the direction of my brush strokes. Now that I know what I need to be careful about. It's always a learning experience. I'm going to brighten this spot up right here. Up here I have more angle to them, both ways. I mean, you don't have to be nearly as particular as I'm being with blending these. I'm just doing it because I can. You know, it looks more realistic to me when they're blended real nice, but it still looks like water when they're not blended. That's kind of fun. Kind of an unusual little pattern there. I'm just dipping just a little corner of my brush now. I realized that I just don't need much of this dark color, especially up here at the top. I think that's turning out pretty good. I'm happy with that. Okay, now I'm really starting to like the way this looks better than what it was, because now I have all these diagonal lines up in here and they're getting straighter and more horizontal down here, and that definitely is creating a much better perspective. Also, I think this is cool having these darker areas like this one here, because it'll start looking like a bigger wave made out of tiny waves, and that really helps it to look more like natural moving water to me. And it's starting to have this general curve to it around the lit area where the sun's coming through also, and that creates more of a central viewpoint so that it looks like you're looking at this from a real perspective rather than just being straight across, so that it's the same no matter where you're standing. That curve also adds an amount of perspective so that it looks like you're turning your head and looking different three-dimensional directions. So I discovered a better way to do this technique along the way to make it look a little cleaner and softer. I want to show you that. If I apply the light green first, I'll just paint over this area because I don't think it looks that great. I added some water to it just now. If I apply this first and keep the area small enough that it's real workable so that it's not drying too fast on me, then when I dip in the darker color, I just barely put the corner of the brush in, and then I hold it in an angle like this. The handle of it is down and the light green corner is higher than the dark blue corner, which is going to be trailing behind on these brush strokes. And when I go like this, it just naturally blends it for me so that I can more quickly get a nice soft pattern like that. Then I'll dip it in that blue again, just the very corner. So this is different than when I first started. I was getting a lot more paint on the brush. And the colors start to mix with each other the more times I go over it. And then I can do the same thing where I feathered over it if I want it to be real subtle. Now notice this looks really foggy and light. That's because this paint is wet. It's going to dry and be darker. See, I just barely dip that corner and it makes that nice soft blend of the colors. And then I can also do the dark color first. I'll do that, watch. Just put the dark color down. Let's put a bunch of it here. And then I can just dip one of the corners a little more this time. Dip the left corner of that brush, and then I can just, I hold it at an angle so it naturally kind of makes this diamond shape, and then I come right under that one, come across there. See, it just feathers those strokes for me, makes it much softer and blended right from the start. Where before I just had it straight, was just going straight across, and it made it build up on both edges of my brush stroke. So I'm just finding this looks cleaner and probably a faster technique. Make these nice and flat down here. And you can keep going over it and going over it and going redoing. I've been going back and forth for the last hour, letting it dry, then doing the same thing over it again. Dark to light, light to dark. And just do it till I like it. Now here's something else that's nice about water-based paint is that this dries real quickly, and I can just pre-mix a color that's like 50-50, the dark and the light color. And then my shapes that I like, that are already established, I can just fill them in. Now I know that looks like it doesn't match, but it will when it dries. I can just take this and fill it right in there, because the more consistent the color looks across these shapes, the more it'll look watery and less streaky like brush strokes. So I can fill this in with more solid color to get more the look of a distorted reflection rather than the real streaky look of the brush strokes. See, so I'm just mixing this color or something just close to it and going over the insides of these shapes. And I'm not going over it all the way over the edge because I like my soft blended edge. I just went over the middle part where all of the darker streaks and variations of color were within that. These tiny things can make a big difference in the look of a picture. It seems like a very tiny detail that I'm doing, but you know, I do it because I can, and I know it'll enhance the look of it. Okay, now this part's fun. This is where I've laid all the groundwork and I have my waves in place. Now it's time to put a pretty little bow on it and do these highlights at the tops of the waves. So now I'm doing the same thing as the last technique where I had these two colors, but now I'm going to switch to these two colors, and I have a brighter yellower green, barely green at all, mostly white and a little bit of yellow. That's going to be the very brightest parts of my water. So I'll do the same thing, revolving back and forth between those two colors. The brightest parts of the waves. Actually, that probably won't be the very finishing touch on it, it'll make it look complete though. So I'll put that bright yellow on. Like that, and then I'll come to this green right here. See how I flipped my brush over to go the other way? Now, if the sunset didn't have so much yellow in it, I wouldn't have made the waves have much yellow in them either. Just because I want it to look like that sky coming through the water. And did that. I'm going to try doing this one first. Do the green. Then do this one. It's just very subtle right now. I'm just feeling this out as I go. How extreme to make this effect. But what I do want to do is follow the shapes that I've made. See, this is the same color. It looks like it doesn't match. It looks like that's going to be an ugly line right there, but it's not. It's going to dry to the same color as the rest of the screen. And I'm going to make this bright color follow that too. I think I'll actually do a lot of this right here because this is the brightest part. I forget sometimes. Yeah, I'll make that nice and bright. Put some of that in here. Maybe I don't even need that green color. I can just do this. And you can also soften them just with your hand. Just smear it. That looks pretty good just doing it like that. Maybe that's what I should do. Put some of these guys in there. I'll redo these splashes. Just kind of feeling this out as I go, how much of this color to put on here. I'm going to fill in a little bit more of this. See, I can just blend it by smearing it. I don't even need that other color sometimes. But I like the color that they make when they mix together also, so I will use it. I'm going to stay with that same pattern of keeping this in a shape that's kind of rounded, going with my sunset scene that I have here. I'm gradually washing this thing out with this color, making more and more of it. Sometimes I just have to see it to decide. After I do all of this bright color on these waves, then I'll come back and then inside of that color, just like I did this yellower shade inside of the bright green, and I didn't overlap it onto any of the dark blue. Well, I'll do the same thing with the pure white next. And then just in this brightest area, I'll just completely wash out the color with bright white. It'll go from first this yellower color, then to the white. Get some more of that bright white. You can see me just like a paint by number now. I'm just making white inside of the areas that I've already created. I think sometimes just leaving hard edges instead of blending it actually looks better. That'll be a little splash up there. I'll work on the splash part a little later. Yeah, I think I don't want quite as much of that green up in there, so I'm going to replace that with this yellower color. And you know what is going to make this look better? I forgot. Almost forgot. Got to finish the sun. Never did finish that. Make a circle inside of there with the pure white. It's probably okay if that just washes out in some of that area. Make this look real bright and just make it break this water apart. You know, like in a photo where it's overexposed, you start to lose all kinds of detail where the light is the brightest. So I can, to get the same real bright glowing effect, just start covering over some of the edges that are in this brightest area of the painting. Wash them out with white. You can see that this yellow has the potential to be really obnoxious if I don't put enough white in it. Where I started washing it out with white, it starts looking real luminous and bright, but where the yellow is just meeting the green, that's just because it's too yellow for how bright it is. It needs to be much brighter before it can have that much yellow. So I got to make sure that I lighten this up as I go and do a lot less yellow as it moves out from this yellow sunset also. I'm going to mix this green in there and then the white. Yeah, that'll be better. Not so much of the yellow. This is going to look better. The thing about working with colors this light is it can be real hard to see what they even look like. It's hard to know if I'm doing a good job. So all you do is just let it dry. No big deal. I really think I still went too green on that. There's just way too much green in these bright spots. So I'm going to remix this color to a much lighter, bluer green than this. I mean, the yellow is good, but that's just too much yellow. Okay, now I'm going to try this again. It was just too much. You know, it happens all the time to me. So just trial and error. do it again. Now you can see this one is greener than all of the yellow shades in here. I just did too much yellow for the blue water that I'm trying to create. And sometimes you just have to see it before you know. So the good news is that it's just water-based paint. This is already dry and I can go right over it with my new colors. Get some white in there. Come in with that blue. Yeah, a little bit of that yellow goes a long way. Got all excited about how good those highlights were going to work and overdid it. Let's connect these together, that'll look good. So you grab this blue-green here, and put white in there. This is starting to turn into some intensive detail work here. Now these brighter spots, I'm going to try to make them more toward the top of each section. It'll look more like a wave. See, when I put the white in, I'll try to put it up high. Then I can still use this turquoise color that I have to blend that border in. I'm going to do some more over in here. I'll make this pure white. These bright spots make it totally washed out with white. Okay, when I get to spots down here, they're smaller, so they're going to be quicker. I'll lay down my old turquoise color that's already on there. Then I'll put this yellower, brighter color just barely above it. And then pure white. When I get down this low in the picture, I could probably just do little spots rather than spend a lot of time trying to use all three colors. Now, I'll probably want to start bringing in my more red sunset colors into this water if I want it to look like it's real transparent up here where the water's thinner. So I'll grab my handy dandy paint palette and maybe mix a peach color that's like this. So let me pull out some white here. Get some on here. So I'll mix just a little bit of this. We'll see how far it goes. Add water. Now I'll tell you something. Anytime you're mixing opposite colors like a red and a green, the result is going to be darker than either of the colors you started with. And that happens with paint, but not with light. So since we're trying to paint light, I want to be sure that I add enough white to compensate for those naturally darkening when they mix. This can be a really difficult thing to do, actually, is do a nice gradient and blend opposite colors. Much easier to blend a yellow to a red, colors that are more similar. But I do have all of these colors pre-mixed, so that'll help me. I want to make more of this. I want to make this water coming up higher right here. I just think it'll look good. You know, I still want these green colors where the angle is not like a mirror to, or not like looking through a window. This is facing right at the sky, so you'd see through it. But then the edge of this wave I want bending toward me, so I'll put the underwater colors reflecting off that edge. You can see this can be a very tedious process, trying to get all these very different colors to look like they're blending together real continuously. It's great practice though. Water that's tipped at an angle like this can grab light from over here and then turn it right toward my eyes. So I can take colors that are over here and put some of them in areas of water over here. So it doesn't just display what's exactly behind it, but water will pull light from different areas and then shoot them right towards you. And likewise, it'll cause you not to see sometimes the colors that are directly behind it. So that's why you get all of this distortion where the colors that are behind this water are bleeding into each other. It's because of the changing angles, and the light changes direction when it transitions from air to water or water to air. So all that to say, I could put these bright colors that are over here in this part of the wave, because it could be grabbing that light shining on that wave and then taking a turn toward my eyes. Another thing I've noticed is that I don't like the sharper corners as much up high on this, because if you were looking up at it, you'd see all of the rounded corners of the water, where you have the sharper corners because it's in perspective this way, because they're overlapping each other. But looking up at water, you'd have more of that continuous blending shape of it. Maybe I get away with putting a little bit of the dark blue in there. Let's see, just add a little bit of yellow to that. I want to brighten up the edge of this sun. Mostly white. Make my nice bright sun. You know, after messing with this for a while, I'm thinking that I want the top of this water to be just darker than the sky rather than just lighter. You can see that on the average, my water's all lit up, and that's cool for this glowing, luminous effect. But I just think it'll look more natural if the sky is a little bit brighter than the water instead of the water a little brighter than the sky. So instead of coming here and do all these tedious little gradients again, I'm just going to brighten up the sky right above the water and see if that's a good way to finish off the top edge of my water and make it look like it's just coming right up maybe against a glass wall or something. We'll see. Yeah, now I really think that helped a lot. Now I'm just enhancing the look of this by adding more and more of these sky colors into the available spaces in these waves to make it look like that sky's right behind it. And it's really easy now that I have all of the shapes laid out, because I did all of my crisscross wave patterns at the beginning. So now all of these boundary areas are already laid on the canvas for me. So all I do is add colors within those outlines that I've already made. I'll show you what I mean. Right here, if I want to add some of this sunset color in here, I can just first add here. This is kind of a messy area. Let's do right there. So I'll grab this color. Now, this brighter color of the sunset is not touching these darker blues. I only put it inside of the brighter blues so that I always have that graduation from the darker blue to the lighter, brighter, greener, and then to the sunset colors. So watch, I just come back and redo this bright green on here so that it preserves the shape of my wave that's there. And then it's very easy for me to just grab some of this peach tone of the sunset and add that in there. And I can do this all across the picture. And as long as I stay with this pattern that I've already established, then it's going to continue to look like my waves. And I can gradually enhance the look of it and get the colors right where I want them by just adding the colors in the right places. Right here, I didn't like the dark blue up that high, so I just started covering over it. But you see, it's a lot easier for me to decide that now because I'm looking at it all now that it's all coming together and I have these colors already laid out in these wavy shapes. And now I'm not doing these strokes. Now I'm coming along and I'm doing more wavy patterns. You can see how I just swoop my brush like an S now that I have that shape already laid down right there. And then I can even blend it with my finger if I want, if I'm going for that softer look. And then if I think that's too much of this turquoise blue, well, then I can start adding brighter colors in the middle of it. But I'll go with the next brighter color. So maybe I do this brighter green that I put right next to it, where it's moving toward the white. Now I think I'll finish the edge of the water up here with a hard line. You saw how when I first started it had a darker line outlining it. Well, there usually is a line defining the edge of any water that's coming up against like the side of an aquarium or a glass. And I wanted this to look like a cut-off scene. So if you choose to do that in your picture, what I've noticed is that if I'm looking up at the underside of the surface, then that line will be a bright line, brighter than the other colors. But if I'm looking down, seeing the top of the water surface, then it'll be a darker color than the rest. Now I had it darker, but I got rid of it and I want to make it a bright line now. Typically a line like this that defines the edge of the water is not solid, isn't complete, because as the water is against a wall, that edge will bend up if the water is weighted down, but if a wave is coming up, that edge might bend down a little. I don't know. It depends on the angle of that very tiny edge. So, you know, it's really just about the look. I don't have to be so exact that it's just like reality, you know. On the edges of any little water drop, it sends the light out in different directions. And so just the light coming through the middle of water drops will make it to you. And so, or if the light that shines straight through, it doesn't get bent another direction. So if it goes straight through the middle, it'll come all the way through. So I know that if the sun is behind this, then it'll have a dark outline to it, darker than the rest. Let's put rays coming down before we move on to the next part. This needs some light rays. I wonder if I have a color already mixed that will work. Let's see if this one will do it. This might be too yellow. Let's find out. I think to do this, I'm going to keep a wet rag handy. Then you just find a bright spot and pull it away from the sun. That's where this little fine bristle brush is real handy. Oh, and you know what else I can use? I can use another dry brush to really feather it out. That'll make it real soft. But you can only go over it so much before it starts to get real grainy. So you have to be quick. Then get off of it. I'll just add white to my turquoise. This was this color. I'll just add white to that and see what that does. Just put this in here. Mix some water in. Now I'll tell you something real interesting about these light rays. When they're coming through water that has this warped surface, they don't all go the same direction. A wave tilting this way, it'll send a ray that way, but then the other side of that wave will grab the light and bend it more that way. So I'll have rays that are going slightly different directions. Let's try something different with this one. So there's a lot of different ways to smear this on to make these light rays, but the important thing is whatever you do, do it quickly, because I'll show you, if I go over this now that it's had a second to dry, it's just going to leave these hard little edges. It's not going to blend anymore. I'll warn you though, you can get carried away with this one and then you want to keep going and keep going. Next thing you know, you go over an area you did just recently and it pulls the others right off and you lose the softness of it. So you have to be sure that you are patient, and wherever you do an area, give it time to dry. Light rays always have to be brighter than the background. I think it looks cool just fading off. It kind of helps center the picture. I feel like if I just have that fading to this brighter and brighter color over here. It really shows up bad whenever you get rays a little bit crooked or warped, you know. When they bend a little bit, it always shows up. So I try real hard to make them straight as a laser, but I never quite can. Wouldn't hurt to throw in a cloud. Do one across there too.
I like that. Whoa, that's a lot of red.
One last thing I want to show you is that if you want to just barely change a color that's already laid down, with this water-based paint, it dries nice and fast and it has a good hard finish. So I can just layer a very thin color over it if I want to just barely change something. Or if I want to change everything to a different hue, you know, kind of like hitting the hue dial on your monitor screen and raising up the greens or the reds or the blues. You know, you can do that with the mural. I can just use a wet brush, especially these brushes that have these fine bristles, and I can just put my color in it. It's this turquoise color right here. And all of this water over here, if I think, oh, I have just a little too much orange in all of this and I want it to be more of the watercolor, I can just come right over the top of all of this with a real thin layer of that turquoise. And that's a quick, easy way to adjust my colors just a little bit without having to redo stuff. Up here, I'm thinking, oh yeah, I might have gone just a little bit too bright on the oranges, so I put that in there. And I have to be quick because it dries very fast, but it's easy to be quick because it's all watered down, it's thin. See, just that thin layer on there made everything just a little bit greener. All right, let's go to the next lesson.